When my sister laughed, it sounded like glass on tile bright. Careless. A sound that didn't belong in morning clothes or a kitchen that still smelled faintly of Mum's rose lotion. I remember thinking, that laugh does not know what it has done to me. You have to understand, grief is a slow, private animal. It paces. It curls up on your chest at night and steals your breath. On the day I brought Ava home to live with me, the animal felt tame, like maybe we could learn each other's names. I made a pot of ginger tea the way Mum did, sliced coins of heat, honey stirred with a wooden spoon. A few mint leaves slapped between my palms to wake them up, and we sat at the little oak table in the window. The late sun laid itself across the floorboards like a shawl. On the counter, a grocery sack held 3 lemons, a loaf of bread, and a jar of plum jam because Mum loved plum jam. Everything felt gentle enough to hold. Ava set her suitcase by the door and took in the apartment with that quick, cat-bright glance of hers. Same blue couch. Same, slightly crooked painting of the two of us at the pier. The summer, we were 12 and 8. Hair frizzy from salt. She pressed her fingers to the frame and smiled. Small and thin. It still smells like her, she said, voice soft. That lotion. Add. I nodded. Rose and almond. We both turned at the same time toward the hallway, as if Mum might walk out in her cardigan, cheeks powdered, telling us the neighbor was fussing with his recycling again. The silence that followed had edges. We drank our tea. For a while, I held on to the simplicity of that evening, 2 sisters cutting cheese into careful squares, buttering toast too thickly, eating with our elbows on the table because no one was there to scold us. The kettle clicked back into sleep. The clock ticked a gentle second hand. Ava's shoulders lowered out of their tight. I've got this brace. I watched her and thought, we will be okay. The body of grief can be shared half the weight on her collarbone, half on mine. I should tell you who we were before the hospital rooms and paperwork. Ava is 4 years younger. A comet of a person. All flash and heat and sudden turns. Mum used to say she was born with her shoes on, meaning she was always halfway out the door work trips. Last-minute beach drives. New apartments with high windows and low rent. I was the steady one. The keeper of calendars. The call your dentist and bring a jacket voice. I move slowly through stores and pick up objects to see how they're made. My sister wears rings on every finger and loses them in her sheets. Our family wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Mum baked on Sundays, even when it was too hot for the oven, because the smell of butter and vanilla meant home. At Christmas, she'd tie cinnamon sticks to string and hang them on the doorknobs. We were a small unit, just the 3 of us, after Dad left. His chair at the table became a place to set mail, then a place to drape coats. Mum never said a bad word about him, which confused me until I was old enough to see that quiet can be a kind of kindness or exhaustion. When Mum got sick, her bills and prescriptions multiplied, and so did my lists. That's how I ended up with power of attorney during the worst of it. How I learned where she kept her bank book and the tiny felt pouch of jewelry she hardly wore, grandmother's locket, a pair of pearl studs, a narrow gold ring with a notch on the underside where Mum said it caught a memory and never let go. We didn't talk about the word inheritance. It felt wrong in our mouths while she was fighting to stay. Mum passed in late spring. I don't remember the exact day on the calendar. I remember the sound the rain made on the clinic window, and the way her breath shortened, then changed, then went far away. We brought home her cardigan and folded it over the arm of the couch. We put a framed photo of her laughing, eyes shut, head tilted back on the mantel. I ironed the black dress I hate and left it hanging from the closet door for longer than anyone would understand. Grief rearranged my furniture and then pretended it had always been this way. Ava came to stay 2 weeks later, temporarily. she said, until she figured out what to do next. The first nights were easy. We made Mum's recipes: lemon chicken, stovetop rice with the lid wrapped in a kitchen towel, the way Mum taught us to keep the steam in. We ate standing at the counter because it felt raw to sit at the table without her. We lit a candle and placed it beside the photo. We told the same stories again and again: how Mum would clap once in the movie theater when the previews started, how she'd scribble grocery lists on the backs of envelopes and then forget them on the kitchen light switch. We laughed. We cried. We wiped our faces on our sleeves and apologized, then laughed at the apology. You know those first days after a funeral when everything has the halo of, "We're in this together"? That's where we lived. Ava slept on the fold-out couch and left her shoes lined up neatly for the first time in her life, as if she were making a promise to me with each matched pair. She helped me go through Mum's paperwork insurance forms, the single-page will she'd updated last winter. Simple and clean, because Mum was a fan of simple and clean. It said the house in her small town would be sold and the proceeds split equally, and that her savings would pass to us both. No fuss. Girls. She'd written in her notes, "Please love each other more than you love money." It was the kind of sentence that can sound sweet and sound silly, until it becomes a test you didn't know you were being graded on. I took time off work from the clinic to handle the call's banks, utilities, the lawyer who knew Mum from church. Ava handled the house. Or she said she did. She drove out on Tuesdays, came back with dust in her hair and the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes. She'd drop onto the couch with a groan and say, "It's like the walls keep her in there. You know, every drawer I open has a little piece of her." I'd make tea. We'd sit quiet with it. In those weeks, I was grateful for my sister in a way that felt like a new room I hadn't known existed in our home. She would talk to me at midnight when the house started to creak the way old houses do, and I'd ask if she remembered the time Mum let us sleep on the floor of the living room because the power went out and we pretended we were camping. Ava would smile. That same glass-on-tile laugh softened, and lean her head on my shoulder. "We're going to be okay," she'd say. "We are family tight." I believed her. I needed to. There were small, ordinary days that felt like a blessing. Saturdays at the farmer's market, where the parsley always looked so green it seemed fake. The first time we went after, I bought too many peaches because the seller called me love, and I felt the word like a warm hand on my back. We walked home with paper bags that left damp crescents on our wrists. At the crosswalk, Ava hooked her arm through mine like we were little again. People think grief is the crying and the dramatic scenes. Grief is also the way you forget you're holding onions until your palms smell like them hours later. Every evening, I would place Mum's felt pouch of jewelry back in the top dresser drawer beneath her cardigan, as if tucking a child in. It wasn't worth much on paper, but it was heavy with her. The pearl studs she wore to my graduation, the locket with a tiny lock of our baby hair inside. I told myself I was doing it for safekeeping, though I didn't say from what. I want you to picture that kitchen the night the first hairline crack appeared, the one I stepped over without naming it. The window open a few inches because the oven ran hot. The drape lifting on a small breeze. 2 plates. 2 forks. The sound of a car passing downstairs. A radio in someone else's apartment, sighing out an old song. Ava came in late from the house, dropped her keys into the ceramic bowl with a too loud clatter, and headed for the fridge. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a chirpy, little bird sound, and lit up face down so that the light pulsed against the wood like a heartbeat. She flipped it over quick. I noticed it because I notice things. But I also looked away because sisters are not interrogations, and tired is not a crime. We split the last piece of lemon cake with the green spatula Mum loved. Ava ate in 3 bites, then leaned back, stretching, her bracelet sliding down her wrist to catch the candlelight. It was a new bracelet. gold with a tiny diamond eye. I thought maybe she'd found it among Mum's things and put it on to feel close. My mouth even started to shape the sentence. Is that Mum's? But she looked at me with that open, brittle exhaustion and said, I don't know how you do the phone calls. They make me feel 10 years older. So I swallowed the question. I told myself this was what trust looked like, giving someone the benefit of the doubt because love asks you to. Later, after she'd gone to bed, I picked up the phone bill and made 3 neat piles. To call tomorrow, to file, to shred. I did not turn over the stone in my mind where the words, "Is that Mum's bracelet?" lay sleeping. If you've lived long enough, you know which stones are safe to leave where they are, or at least you tell yourself you do. The next morning, the kitchen smelled like coffee and dish soap. I found a sticky note in Ava's hand. Going out to the house. Might stay overnight. Love you. A lipstick kiss at the bottom. I smiled. I washed the last of the cake plate. I opened Mum's top drawer to tuck the felt pouch where it belonged. For the first time, there was the slightest hesitation in my hand. Not an alarm. Not a bell. A pause. A bird cocking its head to listen. I laid the cardigan aside, reached for the pouch, and felt the small rectangle of it, soft and familiar. Inside, the pearls nested like 2 moons. The locket was cool and smooth as always. The narrow gold ring sat exactly where my fingers expected. I closed the pouch, relieved at the clear inventory of love returned to its place. Then I caught myself counting 1, 2, 3 and waiting for the 4th thing. I remembered without ever having written it down, a simple, thin bracelet with a tiny diamond eye. The drawer shut with a sound louder than usual. I made myself a cup of tea and told the room, "Don't be ridiculous. People buy themselves something new after a funeral. They do little things to feel alive. They do not take." The tea cooled. The animal of grief, which had been quiet, lifted its head. I rinsed my cup and set it in the drying rack. I wiped the counter. I picked up my phone and typed, then erased. "Is that Mum's bracelet?" I typed again. "Do you want me to go out to the house with you next time?" I didn't know that message, that single heart and those 4 words would be the last time my sister ever wrote to me with honesty. A week passed. Then another. Ava spent more and more time at Mum's house. She said the place needed energy, her word. Not mine. "You know how stagnant air gets when no one lives there," she told me over the phone one morning, her voice light and brisk. "I'm just airing it out, taking care of the plants, organizing the garage." End quote. End quote. She sounded happy, even cheerful. I wanted to be happy for her. But something inside me, that quiet intuition that lives under your ribs, started to hum. It wasn't fear yet. It was just awareness. At night, I'd sit by the window with my cup of tea and think about Mum's house. About the ceramic wind chime that hung by the porch light, the one that only chimed when the wind came from the west. I wondered if Ava heard it. I wondered if she talked to it the way Mum used to. Then came the first small inconsistency. One Thursday afternoon, the lawyer, Mr. Hines, called me to confirm some details about the estate. "Ms. Lested, Carter," he said, his tone polite but distant. "I just wanted to ensure both you and your sister are aware of the property valuation process. I've already received Ava's signed authorization for the sale." Action. Onaman. "The sale," I repeated, pressing the phone closer to my ear. "We haven't discussed a sale." Quote. A pause. Paper shuffled on the other end. "That's strange," he said. "Your sister indicated you both agreed to list it immediately. She provided all necessary signatures, including yours. It's a building." My chest went cold. My signature. End quote. Yes, he replied, uncertain now. On the secondary form, perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Tu probably stamazint. I knew my own handwriting neat, small, looping. I also knew Ava's quick, angular, impatient, and I knew that if Mr. Hines had a copy of a form with my name on it, it wasn't because I'd signed it. I asked him to email me a scan. When it arrived, my breath stuttered in my throat. My name was there. Yes, in handwriting that mimicked mine, but with too much slant, too much confidence. The ye in Mary curved wrong, like a smile that didn't reach the eyes. For a moment, I couldn't move. I sat there in my small kitchen, surrounded by the sound of the refrigerator humming, the kettle clicking, the faint city traffic outside. It was all too normal, too quiet. I called Ava. She didn't answer. I waited, counting the seconds. 1 minute. 3. 10. My hands were shaking. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe she'd misunderstood. Maybe she thought she was helping. Maybe. Her text arrived. Can't talk. With realtor. Call you later, XX. End quote. That double X felt like a taunt. That evening, I didn't eat dinner. I walked the apartment, touching things that didn't need touching: the edge of a picture frame, the curtain hem, the back of a chair. My reflection in the window looked foreign, smaller than I remembered. I told myself to breathe, to wait, to not accuse until I was sure. The next morning, I drove to Mum's house. The key still worked. The air inside smelled faintly of lemon polish and something unfamiliar, expensive perfume, musky and sweet. The curtains were open, light spilling across the living room, and there she was, my sister, standing in front of Mum's old china cabinet, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, emerald silk, draped low on the back, with a tag still hanging by one thread. Ava turned, startled for a second, then smiled. Oh, you scared me. Action and River. What's going on here? I asked, keeping my voice calm. She gestured vaguely toward the boxes stacked near the wall. Just sorting things out. The realtor's coming tomorrow to take photos. Purported not Raider. My pulse hammered. Photos for what? There fighted us down. For the listing? Mary, she said, as if explaining to a child. The house? It'll sell faster if it looks tidy. It is one. I stared at her. We haven't agreed to sell anything. Ader. She sighed, annoyed. You're still emotional? I get it. But holding on to this place doesn't bring her back. It's just bricks and dust. It's not it. The words hit like a slap. Bricks and dust. That was our childhood home. That was where Mum's laughter still seemed to echo in the hallway. I stepped closer. You forged my signature, and it was a prosopedit. Her jaw tightened, just for a second, before she shrugged. It's not like you were going to say no. I just sped things up. We both benefit. Mary. Think practically for once. And it's a consolidated. The audacity of it made me dizzy. What about Mum's things? I asked, my voice trembling. Her jewelry. Her keepsakes. Ava smiled. Too easily. Oh, relax. I'm keeping a few pieces. You'll get your share of the money when it's done. You always cared about the sentimental stuff more than the actual value. 2. I walked past her to the bedroom, Mum's bedroom, and opened the dresser drawers. Empty. The jewelry pouch was gone. So were the photo albums, the embroidered cushion, the little porcelain bird that used to sit on her nightstand. A sick, cold wave rolled through me. Ava, I whispered. What did you do? That's the Daved this nass. She leaned on the doorway, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with something between defiance and amusement. You're so dramatic. Everything's fine. You should be thanking me for handling it. It's really dub. Something inside me broke, not loud, not visible. Just a quiet snap in the middle of my chest. I trusted you, I said, my voice raw. After everything, after losing her, I let you in. And you've been stealing from me? From her? Quote, she laughed then. Not cruelly, not loudly. Just a soft, mocking chuckle that said she didn't take me seriously. Stealing. Don't be ridiculous. You're overreacting. It's family money. Ours. I just had the courage to use it. It's not a dime. I stared at her, at the new dress, the manicure, the perfume that smelled like someone else's life, and felt something ancient rise in me. Not anger. Not yet. Something deeper. A need for truth. I walked out before I could say something I'd regret. In the car, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. I could still hear her voice light, confident, dismissive. It's family money, Axblade. That night, I sat with a stack of papers spread across the kitchen table. Bank records, will, documents, emails. I made notes in the margins, small and sharp. It wasn't about revenge. It was about proof. About reclaiming what was rightfully ours, not in dollars, but in meaning. I sent Mr. Hines an email, then another, to the bank. I attached copies, cross-referenced signatures. I didn't sleep that night. I barely blinked. By dawn, the first outlines of a plan began to form. Not to hurt her. Not even to humiliate her. To make the truth undeniable. To make sure when she looked at what she'd done, she saw herself clearly, without excuses, without laughter. And maybe, just maybe, to give our mother's memory the dignity she deserved. The following days felt unreal, like walking through fog where every familiar thing had shifted half an inch to the left. Nothing fit quite right anymore. I went to work at the clinic and pretended to care about patient forms, but my mind kept circling back to Ava's smirk, her voice echoing, "It's family money." That sentence lived under my skin. It sounded so simple, so justified, and yet it undid everything Mum ever stood for: decency, fairness, honesty. Mum had always said, "Money reveals character faster than hardship." I never understood that until now. By Friday, Mr. Hines confirmed what I already feared. Ava had not only signed my name, but also transferred a portion of Mum's savings to her personal account to cover expenses related to the estate. End quote. Expenses. That was her word. She'd drained nearly $40,000 in 6 weeks. I read the email 3 times. Hands trembling so hard that the letters blurred. I didn't cry. I didn't even shout. Something colder settled in me, a silence so complete it felt like armor. I picked up my phone, scrolled to her contact, and stared at her picture, Ava on a beach somewhere, hair wild, sunglasses tilted, smiling like the world owed her sunlight. Then I dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring, breathless, the sound of clinking glass behind her. "Hey, Mary," she said brightly. "I was just about to call you. Guess what? The realtor says we might get an offer by next week." "I know have." I forced my voice steady. "Ava, I spoke to Mr. Hines. It's another man." A pause. A clatter. Maybe a glass set down too quickly. "Oh." End quote. "It is no boarding in some mines." He told me about the transfers and the forged signature. I was ominous. Her tone sharpened instantly, going straight for the drama. Huh. Our talament. Don't lie to me. 2. I'm not lying, she said, with that exaggerated patience she used when she thought I was being uptight. You're twisting things. I just took care of what needed taking care of. You've been drowning in paperwork. And you stole from Mum's account. Ava. Day is better to 9. Stop saying stole. You make it sound like I broke into her grave. 23-9. The words hit so hard I had to grip the counter to steady myself. I trusted you, I said quietly. You promised we'd do this together. To heaven. Oh my God, Mary. You always turn everything into a morality play. Grow up. Mom's gone. She doesn't care about this stuff anymore. And neither should you. Dotted. The line went silent for a long moment. I could hear distant music, people laughing, the clinking of ice in a glass. Then she added, softly, mockingly, you always needed her approval more than I did. Quote, Semenus tell first. That was when I hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified, the creak of the ceiling, the whisper of cars outside, the clock's heartbeat ticking through the dark. I got up, pulled on my sweater, and sat at the table. The kitchen light hummed. I opened Mum's old ledger book, the one where she tracked her savings in blue ink. Her handwriting was neat, round, deliberate. Each page carried the scent of dust and faint lavender. There were entries from the last year of her life, small withdrawals for medicine, a line for Ava's rent, a note beside it, repay later when she's steady. She'd believed Ava would change, that she'd find her footing. I traced the words with my thumb until they blurred. At dawn, I printed everything: emails, statements, copies of signatures. I made a file, labeled it Mum's Estate, Evidence. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with it, only that the truth needed witnesses. The next Sunday, our extended family gathered for brunch at Aunt Lorraine's house. It was supposed to be a simple get-together, a way to remember Mum. I hadn't planned to confront Ava there. I told myself I'd wait until we were alone, until tempers cooled. But fate has its own timing. Ava arrived late, sweeping through the door in a tailored coat and new boots that glinted in the hallway light. She looked radiant, like grief had never touched her. Her nails were painted pearl white. Around her wrist, Mum's bracelet, the diamond eye glinting like a secret. Every conversation in the room dimmed to a hum. Aunt Lorraine hugged her, asked about the house, the sale, how she was coping. Ava answered with easy charm, sipping from a mimosa, laughing too loud. I sat in the corner, the file in my lap, the bracelet catching my eye every time she gestured. When Aunt Lorraine asked how the estate process was going, Ava smiled and said, all smooth, just waiting for the bank transfer. Mary's been a bit slow with the paperwork, but we're managing. Oftenant. Something in me cracked. I stood. My voice, when it came, didn't sound like mine. That's not true. R did. The room quieted. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Ava's smile faltered, just slightly. What do you mean? Aunt Lorraine asked gently. I held up the folder. I mean, Ava forged my signature. She drained Mum's account. She sold her things, our things, without my consent. Ein friend. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Ava's face went pale, then flushed. Mary, for God's sake, don't do this here. Well, tell ground. I didn't want to dote, I said, but you've been lying to everyone. To do it. "That's not true," she snapped, voice rising. "You're twisting everything. You always were jealous of me." End quote. End quote. "Jealous," I whispered. "Of what? Your ability to betray? One Fively state." She took a step closer, her voice dropping into that sugary tone she used when cornered. "You're embarrassing yourself. Let's talk privately." "Okay." And Des played. "No," I said firmly. "Let's talk here. Because this isn't just between us anymore. This is about Mum's legacy." The silence that followed was suffocating. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Aunt Lorraine stood slowly. "Ava, is this true?" I wailed. Ava's mouth opened, closed. For a moment, she looked almost small. Then she lifted her chin, eyes glittering. "Mum would have wanted me to have it," she said. "I took care of her more than anyone. I deserve it." "It's not." It was the wrong thing to say. Uncle Ben, who'd driven Mum to her appointments, shook his head. "She trusted both of you," he said quietly. "And this isn't care. It's greed." "Actually, Braun." Ava's eyes darted around the room, seeking sympathy, but found only still faces. Even Aunt Lorraine stepped back. I laid the folder on the table, opened it, and spread the papers out, copies of transfers, screenshots of texts, forged signatures side by side. Proof. Ava stared at them, then at me. For the first time, she didn't have a quick comeback. Just silence, and the faint tremor of her jaw. "I didn't want revenge," I said softly. "I just wanted truth, because Mum deserves that much." And when she finally spoke, her voice was small. "You'll regret this." 80-some. Maybe she was right. But as I looked around that room at the faces of people who'd loved Mum, at the quiet fury and sorrow in their eyes, I knew that whatever came next, I would no longer be the one carrying shame. Ava stormed out. The front door slammed so hard it rattled the frames on the wall. No one spoke for a long time. Then Aunt Lorraine reached over, took my hand, and said, "You did the right thing, sweetheart." Arna standed. For the first time in months, I believed her. That night, I sat on my couch under the dim lamp, holding Mum's photo. I could almost hear her voice, gentle, steady, amused. "Truth doesn't need to shout, Mary. It just needs to stand. It is one rested and to comment." And it had. But the story wasn't over, because healing never arrives in the same moment as justice. The morning after that confrontation, my apartment felt like a different place. The walls looked cleaner somehow, the air lighter, but beneath that, a faint ache lingered, the kind that comes when a storm passes and you realize the furniture is still damp. I made coffee the way Mum used to, 2 scoops instead of 1, just strong enough to taste like a decision. The sound of the kettle filled the silence that Ava used to occupy. For the first time in months, there were no shoes by the door, no perfume in the air, no careless laughter from the living room. Still, my hands shook when I lifted the mug, because even when you win back your truth, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like aftermath. I spent that week quietly, answering the calls that came one by one. Aunt Lorraine checked in first, her voice kind but exhausted. "You did the right thing," she said again, softer this time, like she was trying to convince herself too. Uncle Ben offered to help with the lawyer. Even Mr. Hines called to say the bank had begun reviewing the fraudulent transfers. As for Ava, I didn't hear from her. Not a word, not a text, not even an apology shaped like an excuse. but I did start hearing from other people. It began with a neighbor who told me she'd seen Ava leaving Mum's house late at night with boxes in her car. Then an old friend messaged me on Facebook, "Is everything okay? I saw Ava selling some of your mum's antiques online." Even round out. Each message was a small knife, clean and quiet. Not deep enough to wound, but enough to remind me the betrayal had traveled farther than I imagined. By the end of that week, the truth had done what truth always does. It spread. People whispered. Some avoided me, unsure which side to stand on. Others, mostly the ones who'd known Mum best, reached out in quiet solidarity. Aunt Lorraine told me she'd confronted Ava when she came by to explain. Apparently, Ava had broken down, crying that I'd ruined her life, that I was jealous of her success. Lorraine said she just listened, then told her, "Mary didn't ruin your life. Ava, you did. He was never minute, our fight in Subble 4. I wish I could say that gave me satisfaction. It didn't. It only made me sad, because beneath the greed and the vanity, Ava was still my sister, the same girl who once held my hand through thunderstorms, who danced barefoot with me in the garden while Mum clapped from the porch. And yet, she had chosen this. The realization sat heavy. Family isn't just who you're born with, it's who you protect, even when no one's watching. And somewhere along the way, Ava had stopped protecting me. 2 weeks later, the legal process began. "Mr. Hines called to confirm the funds would be frozen pending investigation. You'll both have to attend a hearing," he said gently. "Are you ready for that?" To end of lay. Ready. I didn't know what that meant anymore. The day of the hearing, I wore Mum's pearl earrings, small, simple, almost invisible. A quiet kind of strength. Ava arrived 10 minutes late, dressed impeccably, her hair sleek, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. She didn't look at me. When the mediator read out the details, the forged signature, the unauthorized withdrawals, the sale of personal effects, Ava sat perfectly still, chin raised, as if listening to gossip about a stranger. When they asked if she had anything to say, she smiled slightly and said, "Families handle things differently. I thought I was helping." And well, it wasn't an apology. It was a performance. But this time, I didn't flinch. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth, how Mum's final wish was for us to love each other more than money, how I'd believed in that wish, and how it shattered when Ava chose deceit over family. The room stayed quiet long after I finished. Even the clerk stopped typing for a moment. The mediator finally cleared his throat and said, "The documentation is clear. Mrs. Carter?" He paused, then corrected himself. "Ms. Ava Carter will be held financially accountable for the unauthorized transactions." End quote. Ava didn't move, her lips pressed into a thin line, but her hands trembled just enough for me to notice. When the session ended, she walked out quickly. I followed her into the hallway, not to chase her, but because some part of me needed to see her one last time as my sister before the distance became permanent. She stopped by the elevator. "Ava," I said softly. She turned. Behind the sunglasses, her eyes glimmered. "You must be so proud of yourself." End quote. Even was now and where. "This isn't pride," I replied. "It's grief, all over again. As I am." She laughed once sharp, bitter. "You always wanted to be the saint. Congratulations." "So standard." I shook my head. "No. I just wanted to be sisters. Innovations to wanted as next place to our Mainaldeve." The elevator dinged. She stepped inside without another word. The doors closed between us like a curtain after a play that had gone on too long. The weeks that followed were strange, quiet, but not empty. I went back to work. I started cooking again, not out of obligation, but because the smell of ginger and mint began to mean comfort instead of memory. I even caught myself humming once, and it startled me. The community, the one Mum had quietly built through kindness, surrounded me. Mrs. Jennings from next door brought over a pie. Uncle Ben fixed the squeaky hinge on my gate. Aunt Lorraine called every evening to ask if I'd eaten. They never mentioned Ava, but their care said everything. Slowly, I began to see what Mum meant when she wrote, "Please love each other more than you love money." End quote. Maybe she knew that love isn't a feeling you wait for, it's a choice you keep making, even after it's been broken. I decided not to press criminal charges beyond the financial restitution, not out of weakness, but because revenge wouldn't return what truly mattered. Mum wouldn't have wanted another court date. She would have wanted peace. When the funds were returned months later, I didn't touch them. I opened a new account and named it the Rose Fund after Mum's lotion. After her gentleness, I used part of it to set up a small scholarship at the local high school in her name, just enough to help a girl who reminded me of Ava, bright, reckless, full of potential. It felt right. And as for Ava, I heard she moved to another city. She started posting pictures again, beaches, coffee shops, the filtered version of happiness. I don't follow her, but sometimes people send me screenshots. She looks the same. Maybe she's found peace too, in her own way. One evening, months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a single page. Mary. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that when I sold Mum's things, I thought I was saving myself. I see now that I was only losing her faster. Take care of yourself. A. There was no apology. Not really. But there was something raw in it, a tiny crack in the armor. I folded the letter and placed it behind Mum's photo on the mantel. I lit a candle, the same way we did that first night after she passed. The flame flickered once, then steadied. For the first time in a long time, I whispered, "We're okay now, Mum." To that, I have to give the Menade on the conses. There's a kind of silence that follows heartbreak, not the kind that echoes, but the kind that settles. That's what my home sounds like now. No raised voices. No clinking glasses or slamming doors. Just the slow rhythm of my breathing, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the soft flicker of candlelight on the wall where Mum's photograph hangs. It's peace, but not the kind that arrives as a gift. It's the kind you build, grain by grain, from the wreckage. I still think about Ava, more often than I'd like to admit. Some mornings, I pour 2 cups of tea before remembering I'm alone. I still pause before opening my messages, half expecting to see her name light up my screen. Sometimes I even smile when I think of her, the way she used to hum off-key while brushing her hair, or how she'd sneak extra sugar into her coffee when she thought I wasn't looking. I don't hate her. That surprised me. Hate burns too fast. It doesn't last. What lingers instead is a quiet sadness, not for what she did, but for what we lost. For the kind of sisters we could have been if honesty had been stronger than envy, if love had been louder than greed. In the beginning, I wanted justice, proof, closure. But somewhere along the way, I realized that closure doesn't come from proving someone wrong. It comes from deciding you've had enough pain and choosing to stop carrying it. That's what I tell myself every night when I light Mum's candle. She used to say, "When you forgive, you don't set them free. You set yourself free." In 23. I never really understood that until now. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means accepting that it did and choosing to move forward anyway. It's not easy. It's not clean. Some days, I feel strong. Other days, I still wake up angry. But I remind myself that anger is just love without a place to go. And love deserves better than that. 3 months after the hearing, I visited Mum's grave for the first time since everything ended. The cemetery was quiet, the air sharp with the smell of rain. The grass had grown thick around the headstone, dotted with daisies. I knelt and brushed the dirt off her name. Then, without planning to, I told her everything about the betrayal, the hearing, the letter, the scholarship, about how much I missed her, about how much I still wished she were here to tell me what to do. I cried, not the kind of crying that leaves you empty, but the kind that cleans you out, like a river finally breaking through a dam. When I finally stood, I felt lighter. Not fixed, not whole, but lighter. There's a difference. You know, on the way home, I stopped at the farmer's market, the same one Ava and I used to visit. The same one where I bought too many peaches that first week after the funeral. I bought a jar of plum jam this time, Mum's favorite. That night, I made toast and spread the jam thickly, the way she liked it. I sat by the window, the city lights blinking below, and let the sweetness fill the room. For the first time, the taste didn't make me cry. It made me smile. Life moves forward in quiet ways. I started teaching part-time at the community center, a small workshop on budgeting and inheritance planning for widows and single mothers. It's not glamorous work, but it feels good. It feels like taking something painful and planting it somewhere that might grow. People tell me they admire my strength. I smile. But inside, I know strength is never what you think it is. It's not standing tall when the storm hits. It's learning how to breathe while the rain still falls. Sometimes I still get letters about the scholarship, a few handwritten thank yous from girls who've gone on to college. One of them wrote, "Your mother must have been someone very kind." End quote, with 3 the resident of ground eternal 1. I keep that letter pinned to my fridge. It reminds me that Mum's kindness didn't die with her, it just changed hands. A few weeks ago, I dreamt of Ava. In the dream, we were kids again, sitting on the floor of Mum's room, braiding friendship bracelets out of colored thread. She looked up at me and smiled that same innocent, crooked smile I hadn't seen in years. When I woke up, I didn't feel pain, just a quiet ache, like hearing a song you used to love. I hope she's okay, wherever she is. I hope she learned something too. Because in the end, we both lost something that can't be bought back, trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't heal the way wounds do. It grows back differently, thinner, but stronger at the edges. People often ask, would you ever take her back if she apologized? I was no peers now. And I always say the same thing. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes, it just means saying, I wish you well, and closing the door gently behind you. That's what I did. And I've learned to live with the sound of that door closing because on the other side of it, I found myself again. Now, every night, before I blow out the candle, I whisper something new. Thank you, Mum, for teaching me how to choose peace, even when it costs blood. I'm starred for you too, end quote. The flame wavers, then steadies. The room glows soft. And I know somewhere, she's at rest. And finally, so am I. I've told you my story, not for sympathy, but as a small truth about family and forgiveness. because sometimes the people who break your heart share your last name. And sometimes, the person you have to protect yourself from is the one who once held your hand. But here's what I've learned. You can lose family without losing faith in love. You can be betrayed and still be kind. You can be hurt and still heal slowly, quietly, beautifully. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, tell me, would you have confronted them like I did? Or would you have chosen silence? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if my story found its way into your heart today, please subscribe and stay a while. Because there are more stories like mine waiting to be told. Stories about truth, forgiveness, and the strength it takes to begin again.